my distinct pleasure to introduce you to a man I've known at least 25 years. In fact, he is the first person to have contributed to the original Syzygy, and he was the person I chose as a bookend to close out the Syzygy newsletter. As you can see from all of this stuff we're scanning right now, not only is he eclectic, he's a hell of a lot of fun. Let me introduce you to my friend John Riggs. How you doing, John?
Hi, Lee. Nice to see you again.
Well, thank you, sir. It's lovely to see you. I must admit, when we first met this time, it's the first time I've seen you without hair.
I just got ahead of nature. It was inevitable.
All right, I understand. And it gives you a certain
Presence.
aura of authority.
Presence.
More or less.
People have told me I look more like myself than myself this way.
I'll think about that.
Yes.
John, tell us what drew you first to mentalism.
Growing up, I was fascinated with the occult, with horror, with supernatural, with UFOs, with Bigfoot, with ghosts, and a great part of me believed that this was real. There's something to it. And I always had a strange mind that was half scientist and half mystic. So I was an investigator as well as a believer. And so to me, growing up as I did in a family where supernatural stuff was accepted, I investigated it. I was not what's called a shut-eye. I wasn't a wholehearted believer in everything, but I understood that there was a part of the world that was unusual. So if someone told me that they saw ghosts, I didn't immediately say, well, imagination. I didn't immediately dismiss it, because in my family we had things that happened and we accepted it.
Yes.
We had events, and so it occurred to me that reality is selective. It's a matter of perception. If you don't believe something is going to happen, you won't see it. And if you do believe something could happen, you're more likely to see it. Perception is selective. You don't notice everything in your world. You obviously would.
You go nuts.
You would go nuts. I mean, if you're driving down the street, you don't notice every car. It's like if you buy a Volkswagen Beetle, all of a sudden you notice a lot of Beetles, right?
Right.
But if you don't have a Volkswagen Beetle, you may never notice a Volkswagen Beetle ever. So if you accept the possibility that there may be a super normal aspect to reality, you're more likely to be experience prone. And if you deny the possibility, I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in ghosts, you're probably never going to notice this. And I notice when I've talked to hardcore skeptics, and I say, you've never had anything in your life that could be super normal or supernatural? No, never, absolutely not. And I think, you're a damn liar. Everybody has experienced something, So they're in such total denial that they don't see these things, because imagination can work two ways, right? You can imagine that something does happen, or you can imagine that something doesn't happen. So I've been an investigator of this sort of thing. And what I found is that with mentalism or psychic entertainment, the deep type, people are more likely to tell you of their experiences. And so for me, this was a catalyst for attracting people to tell me their experiences. There's this kind of shady underbelly that came into mentalism, and magicians borrowed that, and then Annemann and others began to bring it into the stage area. But really, mentalism started as magicians debunking or demonstrating spiritualist phenomena, and that was the beginning of it, I believe. And it sort of comes to this day where mentalists, now we've come full cycle. Now mentalists are trying to divorce their link to psychics, and they say, I'm not a psychic, I'm a psychological entertainer, I'm doing body language and things like this. And in my opinion, this is a mistake, because back in the 80s and 90s, that's how people were explaining my show. They said, "Why you're not a psychic? You're reading body language and stuff." And that was their explanation for it. That's kind of like a magician doing card tricks and saying, "Well, I'm not really doing magic. I'm using marked cards and wires up my sleeve." You're buying into the audience theory anyway, and they're just like, "There's all a bunch."
For those who are about to turn this video off. Let's diverge just for a moment.
Sure.
Let's ask you about your creative process. As I understand, you're no longer actively making a lot of props for mentalists.
Oh no, I am. Yes, I sell quite a bit. To my surprise, I've limited. I don't make the full range anymore, but I'm still making a lot of the Brown Hornet. And
what is the Brown Hornet?
The Brown Hornet is my clipboard. It was my first. It was called the Quantum Leap in clipboard technology. It's the clipboard I make. It uses what I call the Brown Hornet principle, which is two magnetic layers with a very, very thin magic slate in between. The principle is that the two magnets, the closer you bring two magnets together, the greater the magnetic attraction via inverse square ratio. So when people write, the two magnetic vinyl layers are brought closer together, which amplifies the impression. That's why you get such a clear impression on the magic slate. I'm still making those, and I'm making the...
How are they used?
They can be used pre-show or during the show, real time. Because at the time, in the mid-90s, there was no real-time clipboard, really. And I was frustrated, and no offense to you, because you made a very good clipboard. I used yours for a long time. But I wanted one that I could use not only in real time, but also several times in my show. I wanted to be able to peek it instantly. And the Brown Hornet, you can get an instant peek. So you could hand it to somebody during the show, they would write on it, you could take it back and immediately peek the information. Plus you could reset it instantly and then use it again in the show. And when I first came up with the Brown Hornet, I used it 3 times in my show. And Mental's like, you use the same thing over and over. Well, yeah, you can do that in Mentalism. Well, yeah. Sure. It's not like a magic trick. Well, I mean, there are magicians that use the double lift in Ambitious Card like 9 times in a row. You can. I based my entire show one time on the Brown Hornet and Swami gimmick, and that's all I used in my show. Oh, and a blindfold peek, and that was all I used, and I used it like 9 times. So I used the Brown Hornet for a design duplication, for a 3 envelope test, and then for a word reveal, and I also used it one time for Q&A. I had a routine called Miso Hornet. And I used the Brown Hornet. I had like 6 Brown Hornets out in the audience, and then ungimmicked ones. And then I used the design duplication, and I used the 3 envelope test with it. So I would hand the Brown Hornet to someone and say, would you go out and have like a bunch of people write stuff down? And then they'd bring it back to me. I let it out of my control, and they'd bring it back to me and say, well, I need more paper. I'd say, okay, and I'd give them an ungimmicked clipboard. So they actually did the pre-show for me. And then during the show, I would use it again. I'd give them a book and a clipboard and like a force bag, one of Ed Fowler's force bags, and I'd say, you draw a picture, you'd pick a word, and you draw something. And when I took the book back in the Brown Hornet, I'd peek it. So it's a real-time peek. You can peek it behind somebody. So I wanted something I could use, reset, and there's nothing on the market that did it. So my creative process, I throw a bunch of stuff together in my mental basket and say blah, 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 and then it comes together. There's no process. I have a problem. I put a whole bunch of stuff in the shelf, and then boom, it comes together.
It's rather like the phenomena where someone goes to sleep with a problem and they wake up with a solution.
It's utterly subconscious. I can tell you a story about that. I was at a magic convention and sitting next to Steve Beam, who's a phenomenally creative guy, phenomenally creative, and we're also 2 consummate smartasses when we get together. And there was, and so there was a fellow lecturing who's an illusionist, and he's come up with some rather vapid ideas. His ideas of creativity is basically take an existing illusion and then strut around, but he's not come up with anything original, really. He's a guy that he does the sub-trunk, and he walks through a woman and he saws someone in half, but what he does is frame it. So he's talking about his creative process, and apparently he bought some writing desk that belonged to Dickens or to Mark Twain or somebody. this to absorb the creative juice. So he says, when I create, I sit at this desk I bought that belonged to Dickens or somebody, and I have Napoleon brandy, and I shut off all distractions, and then I create. And I said to Steve Beam, I said, you ever notice how people who aren't creative make a ritual out of it?
Oh, that's worth the price of the video right there. What else do you offer to the market, John?
I have like 20 books and 35 DVDs, and I've compiled all my books that I wrote into 2 hardback volumes that are annotated and updated and expanded, and I've got a whole lot of DVDs. And one of the creative processes I have is taking existing items and coming up with off-the-shelf use for it.
Yes.
That's it. The Psychic Epiphany series is that. Like, the one I'm proudest of on Psychic Epiphanies was I took the Slidini silks and told a ghost story about it. But
Right.
it's chilling. Oh, it's because that's a stupid trick. It really is. Slidini gets a lot out of it, but if you do it, you say, here, tie these silks together, and now they come apart. People go, okay, yeah, it's how you tie the knot, or the things are slippery or stuff. And so I said, it's such a good trick. So I told a ghost story about how a girl was walking home, and she was strangled to death with her rain scarves. And the way the story is, I was doing a ghost investigation. The parents of the girl kept the scars after she'd been strangled with them, and 10 years later they go into her room, and they were laying on the floor and tied, and they brought me in to investigate it, and I found out that the murderer had been released on bail, or on parole, and no matter how you tied them, they'd come untied. So I get a woman from the audience, and everybody in the audience, they tie them 10 times, and she's holding them in her hand. And I say, no, open your hands, and they flutter, and you grab them in midair, and you say, no matter how you tie them, they come untied. And I say, so is this, and then I address the skeptics. I say, so is this some quality of the fabric, as some people believe, or some atmospheric phenomena, or, as I believe, is it the outraged spirit of a young woman?
When you talk about stories, and I love stories for a particular reason, for you, what is the value of telling a story?
Storytelling is a very primal thing. It goes back to the time pre-literacy, right?
Yes.
The Iliad, the Odyssey. This was pre-literate, and there's a theory of the bicameral brain, where the brain used to tell us stories, and we thought that they were the voice of the gods. And if you don't know about the bicameral brain theory, you should look it up. When the voice in our head, we used to think that was the muse and the gods talking to us. And I believe that when we tell a convincing story, it arouses something very primal in us. And if the story is convincing, which means if you're a good liar, it's chilling. It brings something very emotional. And I'll tell you, I did this routine at Mindvention. The one time I was at Mind is my last public performance at Mindvention. I did some very funny stuff. It was very, very funny. And then I concluded with that, which was bone chilling. And then when I was through, I just walked off stage. I said, and the way that it ends is say, or is it the voice of a young woman cut down in the prime of her life, whispering, remember me? And then I just walked off stage. And all these magicians were like, what, is he through? What? I don't understand. Because there was no applause cue, right? And I just walked off stage and left the room. It's like, what? Because it was totally against all the rules, right? And but
sometimes you have to know the rules
yes,
to break them.
Yes, and it's totally against the rules. I just said, remember me. I just walked off stage. I didn't say, I'm John Riggs, thank you. I just walked the hell off stage. And they were like, oh. And then I had magicians coming up after giving me advice and stuff. And it's funny because Joshua Quinn said, you were just doing a lecture on how to make stuff appear in sealed boxes and stuff, and these guys were trying to give you advice. And I said they don't get it. They don't get it that when you you don't have to explain. And it's like I had a friend who did a show where he produced basically a 6-foot-long anaconda from a box, and then he said, and look here, it's a 10-foot-long African anaconda. And I took him aside and I said, you know what? A 10-foot yellow anaconda does not need an introduction.
Indeed.
You just shut up.
All right. Quite often we're told that we should be larger than life on the platform. Other people tell us we must develop a different persona. I've known you long enough to know that your platform persona is pretty much you
Yes.
magnified.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about how you achieve that, and have you had any theatrical training?
I have hired a director once or twice to critique my performance, and the best advice I've ever had is don't drift.
Explain that.
Okay. You say something funny, the audience laughs, you go off on a tangent because your mind, you have like a bipolar moment, and you're very manic, and you start telling a story and you drift. And you get off script. You go off script. Okay. So you need a structure. You don't have to go over rehearsed and have a script.
Like Eugene Burger.
Yes. You do the script, and I've seen very over rehearsed performers, and it's obvious they're going word for word by a script. You need a structure, and you need touch points, and it's okay to improvise, and it's great to improvise because some very funny stuff comes out of improvisation, but pull yourself back in, because one director said to me after watching one of my tape performances, he said, "Riggs, you're not as funny as you think you are." And no, that's good. That's good. Because he's right. I watched it and I said, yeah, I was enjoying it, but I drifted way off script, and it had nothing to do with the theme of the performance. I just followed a tangent and started riffing, going off on a monologue of stuff that had nothing to do.
Could it be you were actually entertaining yourself instead of the audience?
It was ego based. It was like, oh, this is funny, I'll say this. It was ego based, and you should never work from your ego. And this is a hard thing to learn, especially if you're young. There's a certain amount of narcissism that goes into stage performing, and you really have to cure yourself of that. And I think maybe as you get older and you become less enchanted with yourself, you look at your audience, and if you see your audience doing stuff like this, you lose them, and you have to really get your audience looking at you and being enraptured by you. And the way you do that is you become enraptured with your audience. And the most disenchanting thing with me is that the last couple of years I was performing, I was an absolute master of my show, both of them, the hypnosis show, the mentalism show. I could do it under any condition. I was an absolute master of every aspect of it, and I'd lost interest in doing it. I knew it was time for me to retire, time for me to devote myself to something else.
Go out on top.
And the last couple of shows I did, it was. I said, I'm an absolute master of this. I could go in under any circumstance. I could perform on a staircase. I could perform on top of a table, and it doesn't matter. I could do under any circumstance, under any audience, pull it off. But I'd lost interest in doing it.
All right. How did you choose your material? What makes for a good performance piece?
Well, it changed over the years. What was topical and what fit my persona. The last few years I was promoting my psychic practice, so it had to look like psychic material. And a lot of the last show that I was performing was called the Psychic Ghost Show, and it was demonstrations of psychic phenomena, and a lot of it was just doing psychic readings. And
you mentioned psychic practice. Most people have no idea what that means.
That's very true. That's true.
Share with us.
Well, it's not doing character readings. If you buy most books written by mentalists about psychic readings, you might as well throw them away. Because a psychic reading does not consist of telling people they have a scar on their knee, or that they, that they're creative, or that they're sensitive, or that they're empathetic. They'll sit there and go, yeah, okay.
There's no there.
Yeah, because most people come to you and they say, my boyfriend's with another woman, how do I get him back? So what are you going to tell them? Or they say, man, I'm really in a bind. I have every aspect of my life's messed up. I'm financially destitute. My kids are misbehaving. My husband's cheating on me. Tell me what to do.
Could it fairly be said then that much, not all, but much of psychic counseling is simply offering good advice in a way that the person receiving it will accept it, and is beneficial to that individual?
Most of what I do is pastoral counseling, and it involves letting the person know that they do have power over their life. They're not helpless.
Now that we really need to punch that up, because the image most people have of psychics is, I'll burn a candle for you, it'll cost you $200, and I'll pray to the spirits. Your approach is entirely different, and describe that again just a little bit.
Sure, and this is what most of the my colleagues emphasize too. And this is that you have power in your life, and there is a great spiritual power that you have access to within yourself. It's basically new thought, that internal states manifest externally, and by changing your internal state, you can manifest great power externally. And by believing that you have this power inside, you can succeed. You can bring about any change you want in your life by changing the way you're thinking. Right now you're thinking you're helpless. You're not helpless. If you're attracting these schmucks as boyfriends, quit. Like poverty, okay, being poor is a lifestyle. Being broke is temporary. That's one thing, right? I've been broke, but I've never been poor. My money is out there. I'm going to get it. I may not have money in my pocket now, but it's out there and I'm going to get it. So you change the way you think.
So you're actually advocating philosophy much like Dale Carnegie or Tony Robbins might, but just in a different costume. I want to get some 1, 2, or 3 quick responses from you. I'm going to mention a number of these things having to do with mentalism, and let's just get an answer from you.
Yes.
Okay? Exposure.
Counterproductive in any way. In any way, it's a good way to get attention, and people are fascinated by it. But it's counterproductive.
Electronic methods.
I've never used them, and I've always. Why? It's like James Bond. People love it. It's James Bond and stuff. But I'll tell you a story. My invention. The last my invention I went to, there were people, all this electronic stuff. They had it in a casino. And all the dealers demo, none of it worked. And I had my Brown Hornets and stuff, and I sold everything. I was the only dealer that worked. And I was asking about it, and Jason England said, "Oh, well, in a casino, they broadcast a jamming signal, so people can't use electronics. So nobody's electronic stuff worked." And Thomas Heine and the MindPro guys, they usually make that MindPro pad that usually it's got the magnetic stuff, but they had an electronic device and it didn't work, and they were trying to signal the card, and it didn't work. So I kind of gave them a little bit of crap. I said, tell Thomas that card they were trying to signal was the Ace of Diamonds. But none of the electronics worked.
Okay.
So that's a problem. And I'll also tell you another story. Teller and Todd Robbins, Ray Teller and Todd Robbins, they have a show called Playing Dead, right? Well, Todd bought a whole bunch of my clipboards, and I ran into Teller at my invention. He goes, "Oh, you're that guy we bought the clipboards from." I go, "Yeah." He goes, "We use yours when the electronics don't work."
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, predictions.
Well, why not?
All right.
Why not? I know people think, well, it's logically, there's a logical disconnect or something, but do the audiences really think that? Do they go back and say, well, that had to be this and that had to be that? And I think it depends on your personality. I've used them, and the audience. I had a guy run out of the room once. I have one. It's on one of my DVDs, and I did it. And basically, at the end of it, you predicted a lot of the stuff that happened during the show, and I had a guy get up and run out of the room, scream, "No, no, no!" And so
you're saying yes, yes, yes,
and it's really good too. The way you do it, it's really good. So I had a few thoughts for the show. Would you read these? And it predicts a lot of the stuff that happens after the show, and so why not? And I also used to predict the obituaries for that day. In a mail-in prediction, it predicted some of the obituaries. And
that's actually very clever. Mm-hmm. Very emotive as well. Okay, blindfolds.
I don't think you should do. People hold up objects and you name them, because it's really easy. People say, "Well, somebody in the audience cueing them and stuff." I did the blindfold Rubik's Cube and the lightning forgery, and people screamed during that lightning forgery.
The lightning forgery was
Dr. Jack's thing where someone writes their signature and you hold it and you do it like this. It's upside down and backward. And if you get someone like a doctor or somebody who's got this really scrawl and you go and you write it like this, and I'm going to tell you there's a knack to that, and some people can never get it. And if you're an artist, it helps, and because you draw it, you don't try to write it, you draw it. And Charles Scott actually referred me to that, and I said that's a good idea, and I've been doing it for about 30 years. But
Charles Scott, better known as
Ciccardi.
Ciccardi.
And we're still good friends. We talk 2 or 3 times a week. And but basically someone will write their signature, and you have to make sure that they write it large, because some people write it about that big, but they write it like
Have
this.
to fill the board.
Fill the board, and then I would solve the Rubik's Cube, and then I'd pick the signature up and draw it very fast and turn it around, and it would be a good approximation of their signature, and people would scream when they see that. And that's what I did blindfolded. And solving the Rubik's Cube blindfolded is convincing because there are people who do it. Now, normally they look at the cube and do it, whereas I would do it, without seeing it. But there's and I would tell funny stories about it, about how I did it blindfolded during the World's Fair. And I had some kind of funny stories I would tell, and I could solve it in about 2.5 minutes, so it's not that long. And I actually solved it. I learned how to solve it. So I'd say there's the first layer, there's the second layer, and now the top layer. And I'm going to have to be quiet while I do this because it's very hard, and there it is. And people go, oh my God. Then I'd autograph it and give it, to somebody. But blindfold Q&A, not a good idea.
All right, Q&A in general.
Well, I have mixed thoughts about that. If you can actually answer questions, do questions. To answer the questions, you have to do readings, because you can't give generic questions. I've seen mentalists crap their pants doing that. I saw a mentalist do it, and this girl who was heartbroken, she said, oh my God, she's like, my boyfriend broke up with me, will I find love again? And the mentalist said, well, he wasn't the guy for you, you'll move on. And that's a guy answer.
Yes, it's not soft.
No, and it also did not empower her at all. She got nothing out of that relationship, right? And that was not an answer you give a woman with a broken heart. There should have been some kind of empowerment in that, and it should have been, you gave your heart freely, and there's always a benefit. There's always a blessing when you love. There's spirit there, and spirit always blesses you when you love. Don't think of this as a lost opportunity, but as a step in your growth, and this will attract a greater love to you.
Brilliant.
Yeah, but he wasn't the guy for you. You wasted your time. It was just damn, that was terrible. And I was like, don't do Q&A if you've done, oh my God, what's wrong with you? And but there's what Cassidy, and may he rest in peace, may he rest in spirit, used to call the information regurgitation. Anybody can do that.
Yes.
Write down information about yourself that I can't get off of Facebook. I can't do a private eye search on you that I couldn't know. Just things about yourself, numbers or information, or your favorite drink, what kind of ice cream you like, and then like Kreskin does. That's what Kreskin does, and Kreskin kills people with that. Anybody can do that. It's harmless. You won't hurt anybody. And I'll tell you that I performed Q&A for the PEA once. They had a bunch of laymen in the audience, and I was killing them. And then another fellow who does Q&A, and he does it basically as comedy. Well known, came up and wanted to school me on it. And he goes, the way I would have done that was like this. And he made a joke about a woman who had basically a heartbreaking situation. And he made a joke about it. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you that I present Q&A as if I'm a psychic and I'm providing consolation. He goes, well, I don't like to get involved in people's lives.
So he was busy entertaining his audience at the expense
of the audience members.
Yes.
He's a carny. I consider this guy a carny, and he sees the audience as a warm wallet, basically. And basically, when I'm through with my show, or I don't call it a show, but a demonstration, people will come up to me and say, can I come see you for a consultation? This is the whole purpose of that. And, this is going to create a divergence, and people who are listening to this go, oh, you're a scoundrel. Well, whatever, you can talk to people who've come to me and said, I was going to kill myself, but now I'm not, and whatever. But he didn't get it. And also, if somebody says to me, I have a broken heart, the subtext of this was, I have a broken heart, can you give me hope? And they make a joke about it. Somebody.
So mentalists who do Q&A would be wise to understand that people actually take that information and act upon it, or take the information and become discouraged from it.
Well, you have to understand that there's a large percentage of your audience at that point believe that you have insight of some sort, and they trust you. And if you make fun of them, you've wounded them.
Fair enough. And more, we went a long way beyond a quick one.
Yes, we did.
But I've become used to that. Bending and PK.
I think most people are pretty hip that that's a trick.
All right.
Most people are pretty hip that that's a trick. Unless you're really, really, really good. I'm going to, in the psychic community, I was at a psychic fair, and this was some time ago, and there was a magician trying to kind of cash in on the psychic stuff, and he bent a spoon, and everybody, it was in a restaurant, and everybody at the table was like, yeah, that's a trick. And he was good at it. And really, he's like, the lady psychic, yeah, that's a trick.
That must be a terrible come down. Okay, let's see, drawing duplications.
Oh, they're great. They're great. That's a very strong thing. And you know what? People have told me, like with the brown hornet and stuff, they say, well, it's small to show the audience. I say, you don't have to show the drawing to the audience. You can verbally describe it. You can say, okay, make your drawing, put it in an envelope, and say, okay, what I'm seeing is that you drew, and Uri Geller used to say, okay, you drew, I'm seeing lines like this, and they come up like this, and okay, you drew like a house, and maybe it could be your childhood home. You drew a house and there's people standing. Is this right? And the guy goes, yeah. Very good. You can go back. You don't have to show it.
In fact, that's more like how possibly a real psychic
remote viewing
would do it.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Pre-show work.
Oh, I love pre-show work. I love it. I used to do so much of it. I used all kinds of my devices. I used my executive assistant and the clipboard and
What's your executive assistant?
It is basically a. It's a portfolio like this, and it's got.
Wait, hold it up.
Okay,
in frame.
It's a portfolio like this that is made like the Brown Hornet. It's got a impression right. An impression like I don't have one, and it's got a clip right here, and it's got the Brown Hornet device right here, and you lift it up here, and it's got like fake stitching around it, but you lift it up, and it's got the Brown Hornet information there. And I still make those. If I thought about it, I would have brought one over here. You clip a piece of paper on it, they draw on it, and you can lift it up and get a peek.
What is your strategy when you are doing your pre-show work and asking people to write, draw, whatever? What is your premise that you're exercising?
First of all, people are afraid to do that because they say, well, they're suspicious. Well, suspicious people are suspicious regardless, right? So if you gave them a normal clipboard or a normal piece of paper, they're suspicious. I've had people draw on the table, and they look under the tablecloth, and they look up here, and they write over here, and so suspicious people are suspicious. So you pick your people. You develop.
What do you look for?
It's a feeling, an open, honest, extroverted, because I want them to really write where I can see it. Some people look suspicious and ornery, and some people look open and friendly and cooperative.
How about women? How do you? I know it's really common in this industry that the guy picks the prettiest girl in the stage to come up there and stand next to him, figuring he's going to get lucky, and he won't. So when you're doing your pre-show and you're looking for women, what generality do you look for to find a good participant?
Well, people who are introverted and ornery tend to have a very guarded body language. So you look for a woman who's loose.
That's what we need, more loose women.
Yeah. Friendly, alert, looking around, confident, and who looks like she's cooperative. And And you know, I've seen this with mentalists and magicians both. They'll sometimes deliberately get the person who's not interested in the performance, and they'll get them up. I saw this at a college conference. The performer said, "You there reading that? Put your book down and come up here and help me."
Oh Lord.
And then pick one of these books and and
Okay.
this is someone who should have known better. And
All right. Any working performer requires good feedback
Yes.
in order to improve. What do you look for to get your good feedback?
Ted Leslie used to have this thing that was a calculator that was a bugging device, and it was used to spy on the audience. But I used to go around pre-show and do some magic and stuff, and I'd accidentally leave it on the table so I could hear them talk about me. And I didn't use it to get information. I used it to listen in on the audience to hear what they were talking to me about. And
Rather like Dr. Jacks used to hide in the toilet and put a poster on the wall and then listen to the comments.
yeah, so I got some great feedback. And also, I've planted friends in the audience. I say, listen to what people say and what they like best and what they don't, and what they're saying and what how they think it might be done or something. And
It's hard, isn't it? I mean, initially, it's very difficult to accept that kind of feedback.
because you think, oh, this is a great piece. This is going to be great. And, people are sitting there going, I don't get it. I don't see I don't get it. And you think, oh man, I love that piece. And then you think, well, this is going to be really funny, and the people are like, yeah, ha ha.
Do you use any mnemonics internally or obviously with your audience?
I used it quite a bit. I had like for pre-show, you get some pre-show questions, and maybe about 10. I would do 10 pre-show questions, and because I like to end my Q&A. The last Q&A I did was using hull cards. And I used a variety of different methods with the hull card.
Describe the hull card for us, please.
The hull card is a reversible card. It's a folded card,
It's a double-sized business card.
double-sided business card, and they would write a question on the inside, then they'd write their name on the outside, and you could flip it inside out, and as you read the name out loud, you're actually reading the question. And the method I learned was from Charles Scott. He had a particularly interesting design card, and I developed lots of different methods. I had a way to reverse the card so that you'd read it, then you go over to somebody and flip it open and say, would you please read your question, and make sure I got it. And it looked like what you did was just flip the card open to show them the question. I call it the Bumbershoot move. And then I had ways to read it while it's still in the box, and I had this frosty box it was in with a slot in the back like a ballot box, and it's on a DVD I have called The Hull Card, Masterpieces Mental, The Hull Card. So, but about 10 of those were pre-show. They looked like a whole card, but it wasn't. It was using impression devices. So at the end of it, I'd grab a handful of them, and I would say, James Smith, yes, that truck you want, you will have it. Mary Jones, yes, you will go to Florida on that vacation. And I'd frenzy. And I had hair at the time, so I'd pull my hair and I'd hit my head and just frenzy these 10 cards and 2 in each hand, and I would say, yes, Billy, you will pass that test, and yes, that surgery you're worried about, Jim, it will be fine. And then I'd just run off stage, and I'd count about 3 minutes, and then I'd comb my hair back and come out with a cognac, and I'd pull my tie out, I'd say, like I was in a frenzy, and I'd come out with this cognac all cool and get my applause. That's how I ended my show, and it was spectacular. It was spectacular, and so that was the last one I did. I don't like blindfold Q&A, and I'm going to tell you why. You can't see the audience. You don't know how they're reacting. And so I saw a famous blindfold Q&A guy. I never saw anyone so out of touch with his audience in my life. He was older than the audience, and also he did not know how to pronounce names. And this is important. Ethnic names. I've told mentalists for years to get you books of names. You got to know how to pronounce them. If you work in certain parts of the country where like Germans and Polish people are.
You're talking about homework.
Yes, because there was a person, I said, Richard Mickey, and it was spelled Meucke, which somebody say Mookie or something, and Mickey, and he was so impressed. So this mentalist said, Georgie Martinez. Georgie Martinez. I said,
Oh.
I bet it's Jorge. And who? You know about who? Who? Georgie Martinez. The guy, this kid said, goes, Jorge? And the guy said, and the man was like, what? Are you Georgie? No, I'm Jorge. He goes, well, whatever. He goes,
Oh.
and he goes, yes, this thing you're worried about. I feel in my heart that you're going to overcome this thing that you're worried about. And this guy's like,
Yeah, he'd already lost.
yeah, and he didn't know because, you know,
He was blindfolded.
and he's like,
What's the one thing that every mentalist should not just know, but put into practice?
the one thing?
I told you the questions get harder in the second round.
Well, the one thing you should know, not just know, but put into practice is humility.
That is
Humility.
so important.
Yeah, humility. And every show you do, I'll tell you a rule. My son and I went on the road a lot. He was my companion, and he was my stagehand, and he was my tech guy. And we'd turn up, and there were terrible conditions. You know, you'd send them a paper and say, this is how it should be set up, and it never was. And my son would say, what are we going to do, Dad? I say, always remember the rule, never lose your cool.
Always be a solution, never be a problem.
Yeah, and don't be a prima donna.
How do you protect yourself from frisky participants?
A lot of that is an ounce of prevention rather than a pound of cure. It's how you pick them. You develop an instinct, and you know you watch them before the show, and you say I'm going to pick this person and this person for this and this person for that and this person for this and this person for that and this person for this, and a lot of it too is authority. Occasionally you misjudge and you say, hi, what's your name? Well, you tell me. And you say, well, you know, my act does not consist of guessing names. You go back to your seat. You go back
All
to your
right.
seat.
So in other words, you do remain in control firmly.
Firmly.
Or as firmly as necessary.
And I'll tell you, I was introduced at a show one time, and I said, I have an opening line, and this disarms my audience. You know, they introduced me as a mind reader. You know, our intername Renat is John. He's a mind reader, and blah blah blah. And I say, when you heard the word mind reader, how many of you thought, yeah, right? You don't have to raise your hands. I know who you are. As simple as it is, it took a long time to get that right. But nevertheless, I said, for the last 25 years, I've made my living going around the country, entertaining you with your own thoughts, telling you about that weird stuff that goes on in your head. So if you give me a chance, I'll do the same for you. So I said, you know, I'm a mind reader. This guy goes, bullshit. And I said, and if you give me a chance, this guy, I don't believe it. And I said, sir, alcohol-fueled stream of consciousness bellowing is no substitute for spontaneous wit. And so by the time he was trying to formulate a response, he was like, oh, no. And I said, yes, sir, I understand. And I said, I'll get to you in just a minute. And so I just kept coming back to him. And I said, I have a series of books here I'd like to say. And I said, sir, I even have a Dr. Seuss book for you. And it was like green eggs and ham. So I handed it to him, and I said, everybody go through and pick up a word. And I said, now you have an E in your word. You have an A in your word. And I said, I do not see an E. I do not see an E in your word. I do not see an A in your word. And I said, do you think of your word on a goat? Do you think of your word on a boat? And I just kept going back to him like that. And I just made that up too on the spot because I was going to use green eggs and ham for something. But I said, do you think of your word in a house? Do you think of your word as a mouse? And I just kept going back to him until, I mean, he was utterly helpless at this time, and it wasn't cruel, you know. But that whole line about alcohol-fueled stream of consciousness bellowing is no substitute for spontaneous wit put me firmly in control of that situation without being, you know, like a people call it heckler stoppers.
Without unloading a bunch of pre-memorized wit at the expense of the participant.
Right. I remember my first beer and that sort of thing. So it wasn't cruel.
What do you look at when you're putting together a performance? What are your considerations?
I need to know how. What is the bridge between me and the audience? What kind of audience am I working for? Is it blue collar, white collar, educated? Is it engineers? Are they engineers? Are they educators? Are they? I want to say something at the beginning that will make me one of them. it'll make me one of them. If they're engineers, if they're teachers, if they're artists, what can I say? I'll eavesdrop among them. What can I say that will make me one of them?
So in other words, you become part of their tribe,
Right.
not an outsider.
And a lot of times that's political. And I have a joke I'll tell sometimes if there's a political year. It's a all-purpose joke. I say, like when there was a political environment, I'll say, it's election year again. I said, I'll tell you about my grandfather. I said, on his deathbed, we were gathered around. We said, Grandfather, do you have any last wishes? And he said, yeah, I want to become a Republican. And I said, but all your life you've been a Democrat. Why do you want to be a Republican? He said, better one of them should die than one of us. And you can reverse it, right?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. And that always gets a laugh. If it's a Republican, you turn around Democrat. Better
turn
one
it
of
the
them
other
should
way.
die than one of us. and so you can endear yourself. If it's golfer, you tell a golf joke or something. So you put yourself. You make yourself one of, and they'll repeat it. They'll go off and tell that joke. You can make yourself one of them. I try to do that immediately, and I'm a shameless prostitute. I'll go back and forth. I don't care, because it's about the audience. It's not about me. I'm not going to go out and try to make a political statement in a show like many people do. And okay, you got these mentalists that come out and say, "How many of you believe in psychics?" Well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Okay, there goes half your audience.
There they go. They're gone. All right.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
What are some of the small touches that can be employed pre, during, post-performance that can make a reveal, like a name reveal or something else, even more breathtakingly moving and heart-pounding?
You bring it to them. You have to bring it right into their laps. What moved you, I guess?
Dunninger is said to have remarked, every time you pick up a prop, your price goes down. What do you think?
I think it could be true. My last show I did was in a briefcase, and I think it could be true. However, it depends. What is a prop? What's a prop versus a visual aid?
Ooh, that is a very good consideration. I would suggest probably the prop is the thing that mental epic.
Mm-hmm. Something the audience is like, what is that?
Yes.
And why does if he's a real mind reader, why does he need that? Because in my early career, people used to say that, say, well, if you could really read minds, why do you have to put something in a box, and why are you putting things in bags, and why are you if you could really read minds, why are you doing that? A prop is something that is a bump in the road in the procedure, I think.
That's a very good thought.
Yeah.
I know the answer to this question. Have you ever had a real psychic experience?
Oh, sure, lots of them. Yes, even during a show. I traveled with a partner. We did a show together, and during Q&A, a woman said, "Can you tell me about my uncle?" And I said, "Yes, he's missing." Yes, I said, "Look in Budapest," and it was a chilling feeling of certainty. Budapest, and this was one of many examples. And I remember my partner, his name is Sam. You know him. You know who he was. He said, "What was that about?" Because she said she came to me after the show and said, "How could he know that? How could he know that?" And I said, "You didn't write anything down except tell me about my uncle." And he had turned up missing after the war. He was in World War II, and he had turned up missing. It was a great uncle. He had turned up missing from a concentration camp in Budapest, and they were trying to find him. And the last time that they had any trace of him was in Budapest. And I said, "You need to look in Budapest. There's some records, I think." And it was a feeling of utter certainty. And she turned white. And I said, "Okay, that was something." And then I was at a corporate show, and this guy said, "Where am I going to vacation?" And I said, "You're thinking about Aruba." And he was like, "How can you?" And Jonathan's got a videotape. He goes, "How is that possible? How is that possible?" So quite often when you do these things, there's a knowing, a certainty. And also at Mindvention, I performed 3 genuine psychic miracles. Jeff McBride was there at this, and the guy that does this magic podcast, Scott.
He's in Houston, Texas.
Yeah. He was interviewing me afterward. I said, "Did you notice I did 3 genuine psychic miracles?" And he said, "Well, you get lucky sometimes." And I said, "Do you see the dilemma you put people like me in?" I said, "It's either cold reading or I get lucky." And I said, "But I'm going to tell you, Scott, I get lucky a lot."
Indeed. Is there any venue that is not appropriate for mentalism, aside from summer picnics?
I've performed under almost every venue. If the people are too superstitious and scared of you, and that's happened to me. Yes. If they think you're the devil, I have walked in on a venue where I was not welcome, and I actually got punched by. I worked for a company, and no one would volunteer. No one had anything to do with me, and the floor supervisor came up, and I finally got the guy up, and I put on a blindfold, and so the blindfold, the guy punched me.
Ooh.
And I just said, "Okay, we're done here." And then the woman that hired me goes, "Oh my God, I knew I should have gotten the comedy magician. Oh dear God, I knew I should have done it. Oh, it's such a mistake." And
Was it your mistake to take the show?
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
What's the best advice you've ever been given?
To hire a director. To hire a director, and to hire a tough one. Really, to hire a director and to script the show, and to hire a director. I'm going to tell you, a lot of guys don't do that, and you can tell they're just out there making it up. And less is more. Decide what your premise is, what your ability is, what your. You see, we have Colin Cloud. He's the Sherlock Holmes of mentalism. That's a very good premise. And it works for him, and it limits what he can do. He's not bending metal. He's not levitating. He's not doing anything other than deducing. That's a very good premise, and it works for him. And he's got that kind of strange look about him, like he sits in the room, like shoots cocaine like Sherlock Holmes.
Well, and he's got the accent.
Yeah, plays the violin.
Yeah.
He's an eccentric-looking guy and a very endearing kind of guy, and he does, Sherlock. And this limits you. There might be a lot of things you want to do. You might want to bend spoons and teleport and stuff. But what is your premise? And stick to your premise, and just do a couple of things. And now, how do you make a 1-hour show out of I read minds and make it interesting? Here, think of something. You're thinking of this. Think of something else. You're thinking of this. Think of something else. You're thinking of this. If you could really read minds, that's going to grow old fast, and people are going to say, "Okay, you can read minds. Wonder who's playing football today. What's on TV at home." So how do you make that interesting? That's your challenge. And I used to address that in my show. I said, "Okay, I read minds. So if I had everybody stand up and just think of something, okay, you're thinking of Aunt Pete. You're thinking of the one-legged dog she had. You're thinking of your favorite football team." That'd grow very, very fast, wouldn't it?
All right. What would you like? What is the message that you want people to take away from this interview?
From this interview?
Mm-hmm.
Technology, and I said this years ago when we had an interview, that technology is catching up with us. Mind reading is occurring with technology. They can scan your brain and tell you what you're thinking. Written information is becoming passe. You can write stuff down, and it's transmitted to a computer. I was reading where the Japanese have this film. It's an electrostatic film you can just put under paper and write on it, and it'll transfer it to your computer. That's why I'm very surprised that my clipboards still sell. I've been thinking for the past 5 or 6 years that people stopped buying them, but they're still buying them, I think, because they're so innocent looking. But written information is becoming more and more, it seems to be difficult to justify. You write something down and people will say, "Well, he's got some kind of electronic, a pen or something." And they were saying that in the 80s, that pen reads my writing. They were saying that because of James Bond and stuff. You have a camera in your ring, so it's getting harder to justify. I don't know, technology, I think, is the scary thing. So how do you
sidestep that?
How do you sidestep it? Yeah. And so you have to come up with a premise that sidesteps that. And that's
why is premise important?
Because if your premise is intriguing and strong enough, people don't worry about method. People remember the personality, the character. People still talk about Edgar Cayce, and they talk about Ingo Swann and Gene Dixon and Gene Dennis because of their premise, and even people who apparently were debunked. I mean, Peter Popoff still comes out, and Jim Baker is still very active, and it doesn't seem to matter that somebody comes, oh my God, he did this, he did that, and you come back twice as strong.
I remember a fellow named Dr. Richard Ireland.
Dr. Ireland, the Phoenix Oracle, Dr. Richard Ireland from Arizona.
I knew him.
You knew him. He did a blindfold Q&A. You can find a tape of him a video of him on Steve Allen's show. I have a audio tape of him performing, in fact. And we also have this gentleman here.
Oh, Dr. David Hoy.
Dr. David Hoy. Also a man who went from the mentalism into the world of the psychic. And he had a radio show where he answered questions, and he did the Q&A where people just stood up and asked questions.
That's pretty direct.
Yes, he just had people walk up to a microphone and ask him questions, and he gave them rather in-depth answers. They would say, Dr. Hoy, how am I going to do on that exam? Oh, you're going to do fine on that exam. He said, he goes, and by the way, how's your mother doing? And they said, oh, she's much better now. So he was quite remarkable, and that's a very good book to read. These are very good books to read. If you're a mentalist and you're looking at psychic stuff, these are excellent books to read.
Of these two, as you know, John, I did a tarot deck wherein the major arcana were people who had a major influence on me, those who had earned my respect. One of them was Dr. Hoy. Ireland was not among them, and you were among them as well.
I was death.
Without naming names of organizations, describe some of the travails that you've gone through in contesting with guys who just want to do mental magic tricks.
I've no problem with people doing magic tricks. The problem I have is with people who set up a hostility with people who work in a spiritual field. Who say that people who work in a spiritual field are taking advantage of people. Like on Facebook, people say, "Oh, I want to be your friend." I befriend them, and all of a sudden they get on and say, "All psychics are frauds. All psychics are fakes. All psychics are taking advantage of people. All palm readers are fakes." And boom, you're off. You're off my Facebook, because and what I say to people that do that, I say, "You're generalizing. You're generalizing." And I go further. I say, while you're generalizing, what are your thoughts about blacks, Jews, and homosexuals?
Oh,
because they're generalizing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know a lot of psychics. I know a lot of psychics, and none of the psychics I associate with are fakes or frauds.
And most of them are very gentle people.
And most of them give away, like I do, give away a lot more. If you go to the AIR website, we have a pro bono fund. And if you cannot afford spiritual services or readings, you can apply to the pro bono fund and get free services. And we also have an ombudsman, which means if any of our members do not provide services, you can file a complaint. We have an ombudsman. We also have a web page that tells you how to protect yourself against scams. So, we have ethical guidelines now.
Ethical guidelines?
Yes, and also it was harder for me to get into AIR than it was for me to get in Oak Ridge National Laboratory and get a security clearance.
Oh my!
I'm going to tell you that the majority of these psychics are trying to help people, and like I tell people, if I'm running a scam, I drive a 1998 car. If I was running a scam, I'd be driving a Ferrari, because there are people that call me up and say, "I'll pay you anything if you'll get my boyfriend back." And I say, I can't promise you I'm going to get your boyfriend back. I can help you get a better boyfriend than the one that just crapped on you. You know, I can give you some advice on how to raise your self-esteem. You know,
Help you be a little more selective, possibly.
yeah.
Humor in mentalism. I notice that you do use a lot of humor. It's never at the expense of what you're doing.
Right.
Tell us about your humor, how you develop it, how you use it.
Okay. Now, are you a comedian using mentalism, or are you a mentalist using humor? That's what you got to decide. You know, we have John Archer, who's very, very funny. He's a comedian that uses mentalism, right? He's predominantly a comedian who incorporates mentalism. We have John Stetson, who's very funny and does mentalism, and he kind of walks in both worlds. Now, I was a psychic entertainer who incorporated humor because I did very, very strong psychic entertainment, and I wanted to put humor in.
Why?
Because I can be very scary, and I wanted my audience to relax and be comfortable with me. Some of the stuff I did, at one point I got so very good that the audience was convinced. I could convince any audience that I was really getting into their mind. And if the audience believes you can really read their mind, you're very scary. If they're like, I didn't believe this, but he's reading my damn mind, they're scared. That's scary. And mentalism,
And especially because you're a big, imposing guy.
with this thing going,
yes.
this Spock thing, this Vulcan
Yes.
thing, and everybody in my family has this. If you go back generations, my son's been finding pictures of my family. We all have this. We all have this thing, and so
Who or whom might beginning, aspiring mentalists imitate in either this business or show business in general?
I think they should go back and look at old movies and look at some of these very powerful performers, these mystical movies. And
Peter Lorre, for example.
Peter Lorre would be good. Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing. There were lots of movies where they played mystics and mind readers, and you know, Nightmare Alley is a classic too.
Oh, yes.
And look at how he did it. And
Just for the reading lines, if that's all you
the
care
reading
about.
lines are really good. I see an old woman and calling for you and a dog, and yeah, that was very good. And I think if you can capture some of the presence of these gentlemen, because one thing I've noticed is that a lot of these guys can't speak well, and you don't have to be a Shakespearean actor, but you can't. There are guys that write their own ad copy, and it's appalling. And you have to know where you're going, and quit using the word awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's like shuffle the cards for me. Oh, awesome, awesome! You did an awesome job, and my awesome friend and I went to an awesome restaurant. We had an awesome time. Okay, there are other descriptive words than that. You know, and
Enlarge your vocabulary just once, please.
because if you use unusual words, you'll capture people's attention, and if you speak in an intriguing manner. And don't go, where you're going to say, just pause, which is what I've learned to do. I used to say, quite a bit.
Is actually a vocalized or verbalized pause. That's what it's called.
Yeah, just pause, which is what I've learned to do. Now, occasionally I will, but if I catch myself, I'll pause. And that pause is intriguing. It makes you sound like you're thoughtful rather than stuttering. And I think it's necessary to slow down if you're on stage and you're speaking and you start speaking too fast. There's a rule I learned from my director: the larger the audience, the slower you should go.
As we wrap up this interview, John, is there anything I've not covered? Is there anything that you want to get out there to people
dear God.
who no, just call me Lee.
I would like to advise upcoming mentalists to be very careful with your performances and respect belief. Just respect people's belief. If you're going to take the anti-religion or anti-belief or psychic approach, the rationalist approach, do so with respect. A person's beliefs, pro or con, are arrived at very carefully and for reasons. And I'll leave you with a story. I was doing one of my demonstrations, and a woman came up with her husband, and it's obvious they'd had a debate, and she was holding a folded piece of paper, and she said, "My husband does not believe you can really do this, and I do, and I know if you tell him what's on this piece of paper, he'll believe it." Now, you know, I had 100 ways to know what was on that paper, and when I was a younger man, I would have taken that paper, and I would have told him what was on that paper just to be right, okay? But I was a more mature person, and I understood what was going on here. And so I took that piece of paper and I tore it up and I dropped it. And I said, "I'm going to tell you something, ma'am. Your husband has arrived at his beliefs just as you arrived at your beliefs, and they're very important to him. And they're fundamental to who he is." And I said, I might be able to. In fact, I probably could tell you what's on that paper. And I said, but it's not going to change his worldview at all. And I said, but what concerns me is that the two of you are fighting over ideology. And I said, I think the two of you must come to a point where you respect each other's differences in this ideology and not fight over them. So I'm not going to get in between you. I'm not going to get in the middle of your argument here. And I said,
that is a brilliant insight, and I think an excellent way to conclude the interview. John Riggs, colleague of John St. Germain, I think the world is better for having had you in it, and I know that the syzygy stars of mentalism will shine brighter
thank you.
with you among the constellation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.